Welcome back to the channel, everybody. It's been a been some big changes in my life. I quit where I had worked for 17 years back in April, moved to Tennessee from Washington State to be part of a new shop that's opening, that is open, Ronan Brothers Performance, where I will continue my duties as a tuner, also helping assist in builds, remote tuning, all the stuff that you guys know that I've done over the last 20 something years, just doing it for ourselves now. So changed it up just a little bit. The background, in case you're wondering, is something I've been following. It is an Audi 2.7 liter V6 compound turbo project. I haven't followed it in a minute, so I'm not quite sure where he's at, but he was definitely off to a really nice start. Looks pretty good. What we're going to talk about today, though, is not compound turbos or me leaving Washington State for Maryville, Tennessee. We're going to talk about getting your automatic transmission and specifically the torque converter to stall as effectively as possible for a given combination. So let's dive right into it. The first thing to keep in mind is that when you have a small displacement 4-cylinder or 6-cylinder, you typically have a fairly tight torque converter because it's going to be factory. Maybe you have a restalled option. You have a small motor. Typically, you're not going to have a trans brake function. For many, many years, that was not an option. As an example, in the DSM transmissions that Jeff Bush was using, that I was there to watch evolve and continue to improve. What I heard at the Mitsubishi Shootout here a couple weeks ago is that is changing. So pretty cool for those guys. But what we run into with any automatic transmission, but especially ones that don't have a trans brake, is you are going to get to a point where the engine at 0 inches, if it's naturally aspirated or if it's fairly large turbo, you can only make so much boost up against the brakes because the converter is going to start to torque multiply and it's just going to push through the brakes. So what we're going to talk about is how to maximize that to start with. Now, what you're looking at is a kind of weird dyno sheet. As far as I know and hope, there was only ever one of these. This was an all-motor Evo that we were part of 15 years ago, it looks like, September 17th, 2010. One of my workmates at the time, his 2-liter broke, so he was going to build a 2.4 liter, and rather than risk breaking a 2.4 liter, he used a stock 2.4 header, built a small adapter to run in the car, swap the 4G63 head on top of the 4G64 block. And this is what it did, naturally aspirated. So 10-to-1 compression, S2s, stock intake manifold, speed density, 92 pump gas. So right at 3,500 RPM, thereabouts, what we're seeing is how much power it makes naturally aspirated. We're going to look at a couple examples, and we're also going to look at what happens when you start to introduce a little bit of boost to it. As you can see, this is making a whopping 88 horsepower at 3,500 RPM naturally aspirated. Typically, this is about what you're going to make if you have a fairly good combination. Now, keep in mind this is a big motor. If you're on a 2-liter, it's going to be less. So we're going to go over some of the specifics. Now, one thing that you might be able to tell is it makes a fair amount of torque. That's the 2.4 liter coming into play. The air fuel indicated is leaner than it actually is. It shows a 13.9. It really is a 13.0. That was always a difference in that particular dyno jet. It would read between half a point and a point lean until you had significant exhaust flow. So this is really a 13.0 air fuel. It was optimized for being naturally aspirated. We're going to look at the timing map for this car. I still have it after all of these years. We're going to see what was going on in this particular case to make as much power as it did. Then we're going to contrast that with another few examples that make less. So let's move to the map. As I mentioned, this car was a 2.4 liter. It happened to be an Evo 8, so you can see where it says 2003-4 speed density base. The 6 cells that I have highlighted show what the ignition timing is doing right there. I actually fully tuned this car to figure out what timing it wanted. Now, it's a little hard to tell, but that is going to be the 80 and 90 load percent. Typically, if it's set up 0.83 load factor if it was a DSM, or 83% load is about 0 inches in Mitsubishi ECUs at sea level. So what you can see is it's going to be about 24 degrees of timing right there between 3,000 and 3,500. We get up to about 4,000. It's going to be 26 and a half. For some reason, there's a cell there at 4,000 that was a little bit higher. 26 on average is probably what that should be. Anyway, this gets us a established timing curve for these motors. A lot of Japanese motors will be 23 degrees down low, 25 by peak power. Almost all your Hondas are going to be that way, with some variation, of course. You might get cars that run a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on the bore size. All motor J series will run a little bit more typically, but all of your smaller 80 millimeter level cylinders, so your B series, H series, so on and so forth, you're going to be in that range, the 23 to 25. Their stock maps run a lot more. They don't make any more power. You end up pulling all that timing out to be safe, at least on 92 octane. So this is kind of showing what we got. We got a 13.0 air fuel. We have 24 degrees of timing at that particular spot. And, 3,000 to 4,000 RPM. If you have a looser converter, like a precision converter, if this is a DSM, that's pretty typical for where you're going to be. Maybe you're going to get a little bit more out of it. Obviously, there are some other tricks you can do. You can put a vacuum pump on the car to maintain vacuum to the booster. You do that with a check valve, help hold against the brakes further. If you don't have that, you can rev it up, stab the brakes, and pull it from neutral to drive. So there's a few things you can do. We're not going to worry about nitrous. The effects of nitrous should be evident. You're adding more power in a specific spot. It's going to help force through the converter faster, right? Because you're making more horsepower, your stall speed goes up a little bit. So while that is definitely an option, that's not what we're going to talk about right now. We're just going to talk about maximizing the tune as is. And this will apply to all other cars. If you don't have a trans brake and you have a small block Chevy, you're probably going to be 30, 31 degrees timing here. You're going to be a 12.8 air fuel to help get it on the converter. Now, this is in direct contrast to what we normally see with how a timing map will look like for a manual car. Obviously, above 140, it's all just -5. So let's switch to a more typical timing map. You can already see, though, that it is dropping off wildly past 100 load, 120. It's less than half the timing, and that would continue to drop as it goes up. So let's switch to a typical manual transmission timing map with boost. So this is a sample of what you would typically see for an optimized timing map as it's dropping. 200 load will be about 14.5 psi. It's not quite linear from that 83% load up to 200, but more or less that's what you're going to see. You can see that by 220, 230, where you might be 18, 19 pounds, you're down in 3 degrees, something like that. We'll zoom out just a little bit here so you can kind of get an idea of where we're at in the RPM range. But again, very similar timing right in here, 26 at 90. This particular one did want a little bit more timing, so it's in the 30s, but it doesn't really spend any significant amount of timing there because it's just going to go into boost, right? That's what we normally see. Turbo cars, you start giving it some throttle, you get the RPM up. As soon as you stab it, it'll transition into boost really fast. Especially this one, it was a smaller turbo stock appearing, so it's going to be over over here really fast as it moves. Automatics are a little bit different. We still want a timing curve, but right where we're stalling, we're going to see significantly higher timing when we're down in this zone. Now let's look at what happens when we put a little bit of boost to it. This particular example is a 2.3 liter Evo 8. It was on a Haltech with drive-by-wire. As you can see though, that 3,500 RPM, we are less power. Well, few reasons. Number one, lower compression, because this was designed to be a turbocharged car. It wasn't designed to be all motor, like a 2.4 liter out of an Outlander would have been stock. So we have less compression. You can see that it is indicating 1.5 pounds of boost. It was a little bit higher there. It was actually a little bit too lean, which we'll get to in the log, because I was able to find a log for this particular car. It was a 14.0 air fuel, which for light tipping, with a manual, that's fine. It's not really doing much. I think realistically it was making 3.5, 4 pounds of boost here. If we were looking to maximize every last bit, we would have been down in the 12s, especially if this was an automatic. We're going to be in that 12.5 to 12.8 range typically to make best all-motor power. So you can see how wavy it is. That's going to be a combination of being lean, being on the edge of a lean misfire. But when we switch to the log, it's interesting that even though it's a similar sized motor, just taking a little bit of timing out of it really killed it. So let's do that now. So I couldn't quite get it to 3506, but we're going to get the idea here. I'm within 10 RPM. So you can see up at the top, F load 3.4 psi. So that's what it was really making. TPS was limited to 30% because this was a demonstration. It was up to temp as far as coolant temp. It was 180 degrees. The target right there, because I wasn't trying to optimize this like it was going to be an automatic, 13.7 was the target. It was actually a 14.1, contributing to that choppiness and irregularity in the dyno sheet. You can see the drive-by-wire Excel pedal value is 100. And if you look, 18.5 degrees. So missing 6.5 degrees of timing right there. It brought the power down. Now, a full point of compression is typically 4%. So that's not really what was killing this so much. It was very similar as far as cams, engine size. I mean, it's realistically within 55 cc's between a 2.3 and a 2.4. The 4% at 70 horse is 2.8, right? So that's not really going to be the combination so much as the low timing and the lean air fuel, where it was lean past peak. It needed a 12.5 to make best power. The last example we're going to go to kind of illustrate this, we're going to go to an Evo 10. Now, Evo 10s don't necessarily stall. I mean, the MR with a DCT, that's not how that works. They are dual VVT, so that's going to help them make really good power. But we can start to see the trend follows across all these motors. But actually, before we do that, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit. Let's show this motor with just a little bit of boost. So to be clear, this is still that 2.3 liter Evo 8. But look what an indicated extra 3 pounds of boost did. Another 11 horsepower or 21 horsepower, excuse me. So a little bit went a long way just getting that optimized. You can see the the power in the curve there started to clean up because now it is a 12.0. It is more timing. Right there, it's closer to 20 degrees. This was on E85, so giving it timing isn't going to hurt it. But as you transition out, you have to keep in mind you're not going to run this static. It's not going to be like a distributor car, which maybe a small block guy is going to do something similar to that. We're going to have that big drop in the timing map as the boost really starts to whip, so that when we are making more power, as you can see up here, we're going to be down to 2-3 degrees in a relatively short amount of time. When we switch this to time, it's interesting to see how long that transition, how long it sits there. Now, obviously, I was playing with the throttle position, which is going to ruin the all motor power a little bit. Ultimately, I should have taken a pipe off and done it that way. But it still gives you an idea of what you're seeing. So 5 or 6 seconds in, this would be similar to being on a converter and trying to get it stalled up with no nitrous. This is the delay. And the whole reason, though, as you can see, is because we're making very little power. We're making 60 something horsepower. We're not making appreciable power for 4 seconds of being floored. 4.5, I think, is where we're going to be, right in this range, because we're 91.1. So yeah, 4.23. So 4.25 seconds of being floored to make any amount of boost. So things to keep in mind as we're getting these cars stalled. Now, the nitrous is going to shorten that because we're making 100 horse. So we're going to get to that flash point, torque multiplication point of that converter that much faster with more horsepower. Some classes allow you to run nitrous, some don't. So that's why over the years there have been tricks such as adding VVT to non-VVT motors. Kigley Racing, Kevin Kwiatkowski, he did that famously in the DSM. Other people have done it since because he made it open source so that you could see how to do it. Um, not so much that it's dual VVT like we're going to talk about next, but we get a lot of advantage as we start playing with the cam timing. That is definitely an alternative to the nitrous, depending on the car you're working with. Normally, it gets deleted out of most V8 stuff because it's unreliable. In the case of an Evo 10, you have to take it out of the exhaust because the way the exhaust gear works, it's not compatible with big cams and high spring rate on the valve spring. So we can't just swap this and do this in any application. But hopefully you're starting to see the trend here of how little power you're truly making against that converter that you're trying to get to come up and make boost. Some motors are going to do better. While I was at the shootout, I had the chance to meet the Warnings. Sean has a 3.8 liter Myvec V6 coupled to a DSM auto, well, technically a 3000 GT auto, in his first gen Eclipse. It's amazing. Big motor makes the all motor power that much easier, gets on the converter that much easier. Again, no nitrous, but optimizing that spot where you're coming into the naturally aspirated region or ultra low boost to try to get it as much as you can, as much power as possible against the converter to get the best 60 foot you can, because ultimately that's what this is going to affect, is our 60 foot. Because if we come out at 80 horse, we're not going to be as fast as if we can come out and flash to 180 horse really fast. That's why we see 100 shot nitrous and 150 shot nitrous pretty typical on 4-cylinder automatics. At that point, you really should start thinking about direct port, which again opens up even more capability for how much power you're going to leave with. Things like twin scroll uh, will help against a converter because it sits there and it multiplies. You know, it will limit you out the top eventually, but in an automatic application, it's very, very tough to beat. Um, as an example, Jeff Bush would leave at 24 pounds of boost at 4,500 RPM. That was with a 175 shot direct port, um, because the nitrous is also adding drive energy to the turbo, so your boost comes up at a given RPM. He had a loose converter initially, but was able to tighten it up to where it was equivalent to stock or even a little bit tighter. But because of the combination, the the car would, or the engine would respond and make, you know, 450 horse right there because of the turbo being used, the engine, the nitrous, so on and so forth. And so that was how he was getting the 119 and 118 60 foots, was he could leave with a bunch of power. Anyway, guys, I think that kind of covers the basics of what to look at. Let's look at this Evo 10 real quick, just so you can kind of see more of the same, but hopefully you're getting the idea. Let's see what the Evo 10 has. So this is showing a 2-liter Evo 10 4B11 with S2 camshafts, only using the intake VVT. But as you can start to see, the air fuel is more optimized. It's, you know, about a 12.0, 11.5, somewhere in that range. Similar RPM, just for sake of comparison. You can see the difference between 2.2 pounds of boost and 6 pounds of boost. It jumps from 70 horse to almost 100 in just that almost 4 pounds of boost. Now, the thing that's interesting is Evo 10 has a really good cylinder head, really good intake manifold. This car had a smaller turbo on it. It was a 3576, but it's making very similar power for its displacement compared to the 4G63 stuff that we've looked at already. So you can kind of tell what you're going to be working with for the most part. And, you know, this is going to be Evo DSM centric. Let's say it's going to be more for the 4-cylinder guys. Obviously, the DSM guys, just because of the fact that they have an automatic they can build. Um, but you're going to see trends like this that are very, very similar throughout. For giggles, let's look at my old V6, playing with the drive-by-wire, very similar fashion. Let's see what it was making all motor at about that RPM. So as our final example, this was my 3.7 liter big bore J35 with big cams. At this point, I had deleted the VTEC, so it was only running on the big cam, which obviously is going to hurt spool, which isn't really the subject matter here so much, because we're looking for what it would make if it was against a converter. You can see 0.83 pounds of boost, 3,500 RPM. It was making 152 horsepower, 228 foot-pounds. So the motor, being almost twice as big, really only made half again as much power. So unless we're dealing with big, very optimized builds where they're designed to make good naturally aspirated power first, then turbocharged, you can kind of see the trends. Low RPM, we're really going to be limited if we're foot braking a car. But hopefully you found this information useful. It gives you something to think about if you haven't already been playing with this. I know that sometimes having an extra set of eyes and a different perspective when we're talking about setting up a tune, especially in a spot where we don't really think about how important it could be. Maybe you found something to use. If so, please share it. Please give it a like. If you haven't already, subscribe, hit the bell notification, do all the things. Let's get the channel back on the road. I'm going to be doing a video a week. Our other channel, Ronan Brothers Performance, we're going to start doing a documentary of building a 24-hour of Lemons race car. So you can pop over to that and look. I'll make sure I get a link here somewhere so that you can find it easier. We haven't gotten any videos yet, so Uh, they will be coming though. Anyway, guys, thanks again for watching what I put out. I hope you're all doing well. Take care.